Good afternoon, everyone, and well, after a brief changeover, we're ready for the next session, focusing on the Pacific. Before we start, I'd just like to thank all of our sponsors again for making the event possible. We've got a great group of speakers, including our moderator, Eric, who's kindly agreed to step in for Sean, who's come down a bit ill before the event. So thank you, Eric, for stepping in. Over to you.
Thanks, James. And for those of you that stole my thunder, for those of you that planned well in advance, we're expecting Sean Berger, and I am obviously not him. So hopefully I can do it justice. Everyone has done a lot of preparation, so we'll walk through that as best we can. I suppose just to get started, we've got a great panel here. We've got Obaid Rahman, Group Head for Wholesale at Axiata, Gina Borir, VP for Hawaii Cable, and Takahiro Sumimoto, CEO, Pacific Crossing, and Senior VP for Submarine Cables at NTT. So a nice spectrum of perspective on our topic today, which is the Pacific Subsea ecosystem. And to get started, why don't we just do a little round of introductions. And why don't we start just to my left here with Obaid, just a little bit about your company and your role at your company and your perspective on our topic today.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Eric. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yep.
Yeah. So my name is Obaid Rahman, and I'm the Group Head of Wholesale for Axiata Group. Just to give a little bit of perspective, Asia-Pac focused telco group, operating in 6 markets: Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal, with about 157 million eyeballs, 500 million population, addressable population, and relatively new to the region. So I have an outside-in view to basically present today. So that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Gina?
Hi, everybody. Whoops. Is that working? Closer. Okay.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gina Borir, and I'm the Senior Vice President for North America for Hawaii Submarine Cable. So Hawaii is a cable we operate in the Pacific, primarily focused on Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and the United States. We've recently been acquired by BW Group, so now we are going to be known as BW Digital in the marketplace, part of an $8 billion company, so really looking to take that new ownership to really look at driving far more investment into the Pacific, and we'll be doing that through a few brand new cable projects. So we'll talk a little bit about those today, but we'll have a Hawaii Nui project, and we're also partnering on a Humboldt cable system that will look at connecting Chile into the Asia-Pac region. So a lot of exciting things happening in our system.
Takahiro?
Hi, I'm Takahiro Sumimoto. I'm CEO of Pacific Crossing, and also I'm SVP Marine Cable NTT Limited. Pacific Crossing is the owner and operator of the PC1 cable, which links US and Japan, with 2 landing sites in the US and 2 landing sites in Japan. And I also serve as head of submarine cable business of NTT Limited, headquartered in UK. And NTT has a major cable such as APG, ASC, and we are now constructing Apricot and Mist, which goes beyond Singapore to India. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'll wrap things up. I am Eric Kreifeld. I'm with Telegeography. I'm a principal analyst there. We are a market research firm that covers the global market for network services, focusing a lot on the international business. So to get started, how about Takahiro? Kind of a broad question. What do you see as the challenges in the Trans-Pacific capacity market? As you mentioned, that's where you're active now. And how do you think that are some of the next steps in meeting those challenges?
Okay, so during the pandemic, our demand had soared, and during the pandemic, we need to upgrade we conducted a series of upgrades on PC1 network. And during the pandemic, it was so challenging because we have to prioritize the security of our operational staff members. We can't let anyone into the cable line station. So we were very cautious, but we needed to proceed with upgrade. That was the challenge. And also, as everyone in this room knows, that we are experiencing the supply chain issues. We planned ahead and implemented immediately by shortening the internal decision-making process. So, we can deliver the circuit before the committed date, but the situations are getting worse. So that's what it is. But we are experiencing the supply chain issues, and we're experiencing the shortage economy. We're in the shortage economy. So currently, the capacity between the U.S. and Singapore via Tokyo is very scarce, and now people are competing for the remaining capacity. So we need to upgrade wherever possible, but that does not entirely solve the shortage economy issues. So those are the challenges that we are facing now. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that. Gina, are you seeing much the same thing, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, we're all dealing with supply chain issues. That's something we deal with every single day. I think what was important was trying to get ahead of that, right, 2 years ago. And now it's just the growth and all of the demand that we experienced over the last 2 years has eaten into that capacity that we had pre-positioned and that we had out there and available. So now we have to go out and we have to do upgrades on our systems. So as we do those upgrades, we used to accomplish that in about a 16-week window. Now we're talking 6 to 9 months. So we need to plan very carefully with our client base to make sure that we can meet their demands. And it just takes that cycle of planning and elongates it, I think, to about a good 12 to 18-month window. We're also just seeing, insatiable appetite in the region. I don't think people can move into the Singapore data centers fast enough. So we're trying to figure out, are there ways that we can, offload that and look to other places in the region? So, we're seeing Guam emerge with a lot of activity. We're seeing Australia emerge with a lot of activity. So we're starting to see our cable play a bigger role in kind of closing those gaps of capacity that might be absent just in Asia alone, but looking at Oceania to kind of solve some of that.
So I guess listening to your two responses, it sounds like kind of the primary impact is really it's extended the planning cycle.
Yes.
In order to get in front of the massive demand coupled with the supply chain delays. So what has been the impact of that? That it's longer than normal. So I guess just to follow on, what are the challenges in meeting that? And frankly, have you been able to meet meet the demand?
Okay. Well, we can.
Go ahead.
I mean, the question was.
Oh, can you repeat it? He didn't hear you. So what are we doing to get in front of the planning cycle, which is now longer?
All right. Okay. So you asked about the planning cycle and the in case of Pacific PC1 cable, the planning cycle is so short. We are very small, and we have only 10 employees in total. So and decision was so quick. So planning, in the extreme case, it's only 2 weeks to determine the upgrade and the contract. Otherwise, you can't conduct a timely upgrade.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it was buying ahead, right? So we just bought ahead a tremendous amount of capacity that we're selling into, and we're just continuing to do that. So I think as a private cable, our industry was very focused on just-in-time delivery and working with our user community. Now we're basically having to pre-position that capacity. That's the only way to stay ahead of it in the current environment with our current systems. And the solution long-term is to get more cables out there, right? So from a Hawaii perspective, we were an original, we had 2 fiber pairs connecting Australia to the US. We've got to look at ways to get more fiber pairs out there. So we're looking to build Hawaii Nui now, which will be, upwards to a 20 or 24 fiber pair system. And, the planning cycle around that, I heard the group prior to this, right? Those still take, a good year to get off the ground. And with new ownership in BW Group and BW Digital, it really helps us, right, with the capital side of that equation and get it done much faster. But then we've got to, wait a couple of years, right, to get that thing constructed, built, and delivered. So it's a combination of making sure that we can get in front of our upgrades today to meet the demands of our clients, but really preparing for the future and making sure that people have fiber pair capacity available to them. So they're part of that process with us. It's not incumbent upon us to do all the upgrades, but they're controlling their own future.
Okay, great. So I presume you probably have a slightly different take on this, please. Lee.
Yeah, from as a mobile network operator, which has about 157 million subscribers, as I mentioned earlier, but we do have our own cable investments as well. So we are sitting on the both sides of the fence. So agree with what my colleagues were saying here. But in terms of upgrades and in terms of new builds, I think my take is slightly different. I think it comes down to economics, basically. In the supply chain. If you want to go up in the pecking order, you basically have to just dole out a little bit of more dollars, right? And that's what we had to do, especially given that we have an organic customer base to serve. So from that perspective, yes, we did see some supply chain issues, certain delays, but given that there was a sense of urgency to make sure that there is sustainable capacity available for our customer base, we spent those dollars and we were able to overcome that.
So for you, there was no question that it was justifiable because being on both sides of the fence, you had the urgency of the demand, in-house. I mean, it was right there for you, for how many customers that you just cited. So that was easier, not hard to justify the investments.
True.
Well, and Gina kind of touched on this, but clearly the longer term, necessity is to build more systems.
Yes.
And I guess we could kind of maybe touch on that. What you see in coming along, that you can talk about that in terms of new systems coming along. Takahiro, do you want to start with that?
Right. So, if we look for the midterm, long term, then I believe the market, as for the Trans-Pacific market, Japan will continue to be the hub for that area, and there's several secondary hub discussion. Where should be the next hub other than Japan, and I don't think of. In order to maintain the hub, you need to have the stable power supply and good technical support, maintenance capabilities. And so I don't think of any other hub other than Japan at this moment. And if Japan is not the hub in that area, well, we don't plan a new cable. We don't plan a new Trans-Pacific cable. So, I mentioned in my first reply that there is a shortage of the capacity in the Trans-Pacific market, and we are constructing a new cable from now, which will be in service in 2025.
And I think when we look at new cables, we are looking at that 2025 kind of horizon. That's what it's going to take to get the new cables out into the Pacific region. And there's a couple underway now. We've seen Bifrost, we've seen Echo. Those cables are all out there. They're all being built. But is it going to be enough? I mean, what's active now, they say, will kind of increase capacity about 70%, but we think probably they can consume over 100% more. So it really is up to cable operators, both when we're a private cable operator, to really kind of decide where you can look to maybe solve problems that exist where there's not a route there today. So although we're doing some things to just reinforce the huge demand we're seeing out of Singapore, we look at Australia kind of as a hub, and we could talk more about that. And I think we all have different hubs. But Oceania needs to play a bigger role when we look at the security of the region and we look at the stability of the region. It's a very well-placed continent, the most eastern portion. So we were looking at doing something that goes, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia. Do we look out towards, other places like, Guam today, which is, has a tremendous number of cables that are going back up into the Asia-Pac region. There's a way to connect those environments. So we're looking at ways to build our new cables and then think about mesh architectures, which we believe is what we're all going to have to shift to. We've all lived in a point-to-point world. We've built point-to-point. We're going to build Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, the U.S., And we're going to let people buy that in different multiple segments so they can create their kind of mesh architecture of what they need through high count fiber and have true scalability. And then that can be interconnected at different points to cables that span throughout the Pacific and potentially, into South America. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. I mean, and Gina, I just want to follow on that a little bit. Is there anything? I mean, given that your customers will be putting together a mesh, based on point-to-point systems, so clearly they'll be buying from multiple systems. Is there anything from the cable developer or cable operator level that can augment that? Can it help them along the way with interconnecting with other systems, or is that something you just you kind of leave to your customers?
I think we're hearing that, right? So I think it's, for the most part, I think the folks who have been consuming the submarine capacity have kind of solved for that themselves. But I think they may start to look to us, and we may have to find a way to all kind of play a little better in the sandbox, for lack of a better way to describe it. And I think the one way we do that is that I can't think of a new cable in recent times that hasn't gone into a carrier-neutral data center wherever it is. So that creates that logical meet point, and we're seeing a lot of development in that data center space for that. And, we have plenty of those in Singapore. We've got plenty of those in Australia. We've got new ones being built, in Darwin, a place where no cable landed before. We're going to see new data centers go in. And from our perspective, we're even going to build a data center now in New Zealand so that we can bring more cables in and look for ways for them to interconnect. So I think as long as all of the marketplaces, clearly there's a tremendous amount of that, in Japan, as long as we see places where the cables can still come together, it allows people to buy what they need from multiple systems and start to build routes that, make sense to create more of a mesh architecture, create more resiliency for their own purposes and serving their community. Because I know, as Abhi said, you've got to have 100% uptime, right? Your customers demand it on all of the time. And so as much as we want to be able to do that 100% all of the time, we're a single routed cable. And so, you've got to make sure that you've got multiple paths and multiple ways to do that.
If I may just add to that, I think the reason I'm smirking is Gina has picked up the right word, mesh network. Because that's exactly how I see the whole region. And again, I'm not going to basically focus on Pacific, but, Asia Pac as a whole. Now, recent capital deployment is happening on the cross-Pacific routes. But, just quoting telegeography, most of the data growth or intra-Asia data growth is the highest at this point in time amongst all different routes. And that's where I think a lot of work still needs to be done in terms of creating that mesh network, just combining all the assets that are there at this point in time, so that, you can sweat them better, you can get a better return, you can basically get more optimization out of it. So I don't want to delve into the details of, what Axiata does, who's my employer, but generally speaking, that is exactly what we're trying to do. From an organic standpoint, we have existing cable investments, but they are not connected together. And with new investments that we're doing, what we're trying to do is make sure that we have certain central focal points whereby, everything converges, connects. It doesn't serve, one purpose. It serves, a wider purpose of the region. However, the issue doesn't stop at the commercial part only. There are certain constraints within the industry, within the general Asia-Pac region, which need to be addressed, for this mesh network to materialize. First is regulatory. Not that, like most of the nations are digitalizing, it's high on their agenda, but when you look at the regulation itself, it's not supporting that agenda per se. And again, I'm talking, from experience. For example, there's one nation which has just opened or liberalized their market for, cable investments to happen, but an operator like me can't have access to my own cable investment if I were to, invest there. There are layers in between. of various licensing that needs to go through. So, it's not only a commercial, as I said, issue, it's more a broader issue. That's one thing. Then, we are the subject matter experts over here. Probably under this roof, everyone knows how to basically lay out a cable and how to do it efficiently, optimally. But then most of the regulation stipulates where you can land. That basically causes some angst as well, because it's not only the subsea part. You have to look into the terrestrial part as well, how to connect, how to optimize. That causes issues. Then again, cabotage issues are certain things that, kind of, inhibits operators like us to, create or convert that vision of a mesh network into a physical mesh itself.
So there's a lot of really good points there. And I think it's a pretty good segue into, one of the big topics that we were continually talking about, always comes up, is, what are the best hubs or new hubs? What are the best points of interconnectivity that maybe have the favorable features and don't have the unfavorable features, like you said, like some of these regulatory regimes make them somewhat unattractive. So I guess I want to go back to Takahiro. You're developing a new cable that will be ready in 2025. Could you tell us a little bit more about its connectivity and why you chose the points that you did for locations and landings?
So the new cable is planned almost at the same site as current PC1. So it will be landing at Shima, and Minami Boso, it's a landing station of Jupiter as well, not Ajigawara, but Shima and Minami Boso. And Grover Beach, currently PC1 cable is landing there, and the new cable also lands there. So the first phase is that we link Minami Boso, Shima, and Grover Beach. And then there may be a question that is whether PC1 is retiring or not. And my answer is no. PC1 currently is about to be sold out, and we need definitely additional capacity. So we'll be utilizing our existing landing station resources and add a capacity by a new cable. So entity group-wise in the Trans-Pacific, there will be PC1 continues to service, even if it is 22 years old, and Jupiter, and the new cable, the name will be Juno. So these three cables will serve the Trans-Pacific. And I said that the PC1 will not retire, and it will go beyond 2025. Currently, it's 22 years old, and because the system is still healthy, and there's no need to retire the healthy system at all. And I would like to mention that PC1 South has no fault since 2007. So we have no fault, we do not experience a single fault for 15 years. So there's no reason at all to retire. And PC1 North, the repair will be completed today. So, so our system is totally healthy.
So some great points there. I mean, while we're always talking about new ideas for new hubs, the existing ones are there for a reason, and you mentioned earlier that NTT isn't interested in building a system that doesn't land in Japan, and there's well-developed systems for that, and you're taking advantage of that, and there's still certainly a lot of demand and a primary use case for a trans-Pacific capacity. However, there are others, and maybe Gina, you could speak to some of the other ideas.
Yeah. So, and again, I think we all have we have a bias of how we see the world, right, from where we operate, and the Pacific is huge, and I think that there's so many different routes that we need to accommodate for. As we look to develop our newest cable, right, we continue to operate. We're a New Zealand-based company. We operate in New Zealand and Australia, but we're trying to figure out where do we need to go beyond those borders. So clearly, Singapore is important to us, and that's committed on our cable system is to go into Singapore so that we can get to all the different data centers there. But then we're really looking to say, how do we get outside of Sydney? Because today, there's tremendous amounts of connectivity within Sydney, but there's also areas like Darwin and looking at building a new digital infrastructure there. You know, the government is very involved in bringing new investment there because we're trying to look at how we offload, right, some of the power demands, some of the space demands, some of the marine entry demands. You know, there's so much going on throughout Asia, through Japan, through Singapore. Can it take all of that growth and demand, or are there places we need to look at to bring it to? So is Darwin a good spot for that is outside of Sydney, where all of, you know, the connectivity takes place right now, or virtually all of that in Australia? You know, again, we mentioned Guam. Our cables today aren't planned to go to Guam, but because we're private and we're nimble, we can kind of listen, right, to our community of customers, and we're hearing that maybe we should consider it. So, you know, it's on the drawing board. It's not committed anywhere, but it's something that we want to collaborate with industry on and with our user community to make sure that we hear them so they can have more interchange points. You know, so from our perspective, you know, we still see Australia as extraordinarily important. We think there are other places. You know, New Zealand, very tiny country, right? It has a lot to offer, right? It's very inexpensive to process data there. It's got great cooling efforts. You know, if we build a data center there, will people come? And that's one of the things we're trying to answer. You know, you've got countries like Singapore and New Zealand and Chile working together to say they can share data openly. And if we start to see more of these things happen throughout the globe, we need to have places where we can offload things that don't need to be latency sensitive or don't need to be cached locally, and find new places to put them so that we can continue to create space, right, where it needs to be. So that's kind of one of the other models we're looking at, and we're looking at building a 3 to 40 watt mega data center called Data Grid in New Zealand to kind of say, is that something else that can help in this puzzle piece? And then do we look to open up completely new routes, right? Not even beyond the hubs, but, you know, we've been asked to participate with a group out of Chile, Desarrollo País, to say, you know, is there a way that South America can participate in the Asian market differently today? You know, is there a new route out there? So we're looking at saying, okay, let's connect Chile directly into Singapore. Well, that's a huge cable system, right? If we look at that on the globe and how many kilometers that is. But if we take a cable out of South America and we land it in a New Zealand or a Sydney, you know, there are 4 or 5 alternatives then to get into Asia from there. They can go direct, you know, to Japan. They can go into Singapore. So they can interconnect and make their choice. So that's the kind of ecosystem we're looking to build through new cables. And we think with that, we'll see new switching centers emerge as regionalized hubs. And there'll be more of those instead of the few that we have today.
It's really interesting. And you've already acknowledged that to some degree the use case for, you know, a hub being in, you know, a place like New Zealand is clearly going to be appropriate for applications on a global basis that are not as sensitive to latency. I mean, clearly. But there's a whole long list of things that we look for to have a good hub, and there are other things on that list that are more. And I want to bring that to you, Obaid.
So yeah, Eric, I totally second what Gina is saying, but you know, I would like to add something to that. Now, you know, just thinking out loud, when you talk about regional hubs, let's see what are the ingredients of a successful regional hub. You know, if you think of Singapore, if you think of Hong Kong, it was first of all, again, as I mentioned earlier, the regulation, the appetite of the state to basically, you know, make it happen. Free accessibility to capital, right? Skill, the maturity of that country to basically, you know, handle that, and all the, you know, the ancillary and tertiary businesses that can be created around it. You know, it's not only subsea cable, as you aptly mentioned, it's data centers, you know, all the businesses, incubation centers. It's a whole ecosystem that needs to come with it, right? And that is happening in developed nations. And again, you know, that's the view I would like to bring in. I've worked in 4 continents. I've had an outside access to Asia, but this is the first time, last 15 months, I've spent living, breathing Asia now, you know, living out of Malaysia. My perspective has changed as well now. As Gina mentioned, Pacific is not Pacific, Asia Pacific itself is a large place. 1/3 of the population is here. But, everything gravitates into some regional hubs. Why? Right? Again, certain elements, macro factors that need to be fixed in, but that they can be fixed. Digitalization, if we talk about it, it means something different to a developed nation versus an emerging market. Given that, I represent emerging markets, different view. Digitalization over there is not only about GDP growth. GDP growth is a byproduct. They go after poverty elevation. They go after providing social security, digitalizing healthcare, digitalizing education, even, addressing diversity and inclusion. That kind of converts into a GDP uptick. And again, just to quote, I just recently read, as per ITU, 7% of broadband integration increase equates to 1% GDP growth, developed market or an emerging market. For an emerging market, 1% GDP uptick is huge. Now, if you look at the markets within Asia, they are labor surplus markets. Now, especially, where we sit, you take Indonesia as an example, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, most of Nepal. And there's a cost to basically, export this labor outside. Right? With regional hubs or local hubs created, you insource, all this online labor, which becomes accessible to the outside market. Meaning that, not only they were contributing to the gross national income, but they start contributing to the gross domestic product, GDP. They increase the tax base, meaning that, there's more money to be spent. Meaning that, economically, they become more active. So the point I'm leading to is that why can't we democratize all these regional hubs? Rather than having big regional hubs, New Zealand is a good example, but we can have a hub in each country because it drives the GDP itself. And I think that's an aspiration which I'm going to talk about later that Axiata as a group has to basically drive going forward. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, you need to upskill people. Yes, you need to create infrastructure. But with everything digital, there's a physical part, and we are willing to do that physical part at this point in time.
That's a lot of ground you covered there. I was thinking about, and you've already addressed things I was kind of planning to ask you. You're active in so many markets and many emerging markets. And one of the ways I was going to phrase the question is, are those markets adequately served by the hub regime we have now? And it sounds like not really. Again, hubs are hubs for a reason. But the other question I was thinking of is that will we see a fragmentation of hubs? We certainly have the big ones we have now, but will we see secondary and tertiary? And you could argue they're not even hubs at that point. I said everybody has their own critical mass to do the development of all those development things that you talked about in any given emerging market. So what is my question then is how much is enough? What is the right balance of the concentration that you need for efficiency, yet the reach to serve all these different markets, particularly emerging markets? How do you think that pans out?
Very valid question, Eric, and again, it leads to what I was saying earlier. Fragmentation, let's not call it fragmentation, let's call it decentralization, right?
Perfect.
A better politically correct word. But I think, Eric, there are certain elements that have to be considered before that can happen. First is it's not going to be a seismic shift. It's going to be a systematic, gradual shift. But it has to happen. The geopolitics within that region are kind of, carving out new opportunities for certain countries, right? So let's not get into what specific, we all know what. But Indonesia is, emerging as one of the regional hubs naturally because of the geographical location of that country.
Huge population.
The critical mass that they have, absolutely. With with the right infrastructure being built over there. So they have all the right ingredients. So without a nation or a state doing a lot of or picking up a lot of momentum in terms of marketing or touting themselves as regional hubs, they will naturally become that, right? And again, certain things are helping. Like moratorium in Singapore is helping. What's happening in South China Sea is helping. But things are naturally, grooming now. Similarly, if you come westwards, deeper into Bay of Bengal, we are seeing, some kind of, political shifts over there as well. And then over there as well, with some liberalization, certain elements, changing, there will be some regional hubs happening over there as well.
Great. That's really interesting, really helpful. Thank you. Gina, do you want to add anything to that? Just sort of kind of serving the underserved, if you will, or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we deal with all the time because, yes, I mean, I agree. We're gonna build an endpoint in Indonesia, and there are a lot of markets that you locally can deal with internal to that, and a lot of islands around that community. But we're building cables that are 22,000 kilometers, and they're passing all kinds of Pacific islands. And you talk about, really needing to find access and being able to upskill, upgrade, create new opportunities in their countries. We have to find a way to do that. So we're working very, very hard with the likes of Tonga, which recently we had a country that basically had no access after they had the volcanic explosion. They were down. They still don't have their cable connected within the country itself, their domestic cable. They had one international exit point and it was down. Can we really allow that to happen in today's digital economy? What does that do to people? Right? So we're trying to figure out as we build these new systems, how do we pre-position branching units so that those continents, when funding is available, and it's difficult, right? We have to work with, the Australian government, the Japanese government has been very, very helpful to this, the American government. We've got to find a way to bring these sources together so that when people are out building these cables, we have a bigger view, right? And we have to think about those markets, and we've got to pre-position, so Nauru and Tavalu and, Juan Fernandez, so places can get access that they've never had before to international points in really more than one direction. They've got to be able to go in two directions because there's too much seismic risk out there, not to mention the geopolitical risk that we see. And it's just something we have to think about as an industry supporting more.
Great. Okay. We've gotten a few questions in from the audience, and one came and went. We kind of addressed it with Guam. I hope we addressed that adequately. I mean, it's just, there's already some connectivity there. It's an interesting location, and I think we talked about that a little bit. But the one on the bottom here is interesting, because on the one hand, we're talking about emerging markets from the point of view of a mobile operator. But what about the big the big cloud providers, the big content companies that have a presence, and how is the current infrastructure? What are we anticipating from them that's going to change the architecture, or what are they looking for from the architecture that we have out there now in Asia Pacific? I mean, Takahiro, do you have any insight into that?
Okay. So OTT is certainly our customers, and they occupy the vast and majority of our traffic. So so do they influence? Yes. But as for the inter-Asia and Trans-Pacific, with the current geopolitical sentiments, well, we factor in every aspect, and we especially we need to secure the diversity. That is very important because when you construct a cable in inter-Asia, then you have to factor in the earthquakes and the undersea kind of conditions. Otherwise, you will be out of service for several months in the worst case. So other than geopolitical sentiment, I would say diversity needs to be secured, and OTT certainly has influences, but not all.
Can I take it as
Oh,
well?
absolutely.
So I agree with what Takahiro-san is saying, but again, seeing it from an MNO perspective, there are two elements, there are two forces which influence. Obviously, One is the supplier, the OTTs, who are the biggest suppliers right now, but then it's the consumer as well, what they're using. That kind of influences as well, right? Is the data going westward, eastward? So that's one influence. But the biggest factor within our region, within APAC, is affordability. Affordability in the sense as, what's the cost per unit in terms of build out, right? So as I was mentioning earlier, we don't have access to a lot of capital. So that kind of is influencing, at least in terms of our decisions as, how do we build, where do we build, or is it point to point, is it going to hubs? But one thing that has happened good, again, from our perspective, is that new capital is being injected through these OTTs into the build-outs. That is kind of freeing up our capital to work domestically and inwards, make our infrastructure more robust, better.
That's really interesting. On the last panel, they talked a little bit about the evolving business models and those types of partnerships. So that's a really good way to put it. The largesse of that capital coming in from the OTTs, it's almost like the other capital can kind of go elsewhere, and then the whole ecosystem goes end to end and gets.
So yeah, it has a less of capital investment from our side. Yes, it has ramifications, a deep impact on your P&L sustainability. But then you can create new adjacent businesses with that same capital. Right? So to answer this, it's a very valid question. Again, I see that OTTs obviously are influencing a lot in terms of the intercontinental connections, where it comes, routes and everything. But mobile network operators and the users itself are kind of influencing how intra-Asia or intra-region connectivity happens.
Well, that takes us exactly out of time. Gina, did you want to slip in a last word, or are you okay?
I think I'm good on that one. So
Okay,
yeah.
all right, that's good. So, maybe a little early for happy hour, but yeah, that's all we have. And so please join me in thanking our panelists for a great session.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, everyone. That was great. We've got one more Subsea session this evening. Not happy hour just yet, guys. But I think it's going to be a really good one, looking at the supply chain issues that have been mentioned throughout. So do stick around for that one. Brilliant.